Hello, good morning to those in Brazil, good afternoon to those in Switzerland. My name is Mariana Buquerque, and I'm the Deputy Director of Projects at the Brazilian Center for International Relations, CEBRI. Today, it is my honor to welcome you to the debate Security Council and the Promotion of Peace and Security, Perspectives for Swiss-Brazilian Cooperation. This panel is co-organized between CEBRI's Multilateralism Program and the Swiss delegation in Brazil, supported by the Geneva Centre for Peace and Security. The Swiss delegation has joined CEBRI as a member this year, so it is my pleasure not only to welcome you to CEBRI's network, but also to start our partnership with such a timely and relevant debate. Next year, Brazil and Switzerland will be together at the United Nations Security Council in a context in which not only the body, but multilateralism itself are facing an international turmoil. To analyze what are the obstacles and prospects for doing action in the Security Council, we will have today 4 distinguished and high-level specialists who have on-the-ground experience with multilateral security. First, Ambassador Antônio Patriota, who is a member of CEBRI's International Advisory Board, former Minister of Foreign Affairs, and the Brazilian Permanent Representative at the UN. I would like also to extend a warm welcome to Ambassador Pietro Lazzeri, the Swiss ambassador to Brazil. Ambassador Lazzeri has an extensive background in peace and security affairs, as he served as a diplomatic advisor for humanitarian policy at the Federal Department of Foreign Affairs in Bern, and also participated in several missions as a delegate of the International Committee of the Red Cross and in the United Nations mission in East Timor. Our panel is also composed by Gustavo Senechal, currently the head of International Peace and Security Division at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Brazil, and formerly the head of the United Nations Division in Itamaraty. And last but not least, it is also my honor to welcome and receive Ambassador Thomas Greminger, Director of the Geneva Centre for Security Policy. He has an extensive resume, but I will just highlight his role as a permanent representative of Switzerland to the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe, and in the United Nations and international organizations in Vienna. So before we start our debate, I will pass the floor to Ambassador Patriota for brief introductory remarks. So Ambassador, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mariana. Thank you for including me in this discussion, and welcome to all my colleagues in this panel, Ambassador Pietro Lazzeri of Switzerland and Brazil, Gustavo Senechal, a very dear colleague and friend who is now with the very demanding responsibility for overseeing our day-to-day work in the Security Council, and Ambassador Thomas Greminger, with whom I met recently in Geneva as a member of the group Leaders for Peace, and who I know has been very involved in the OSCE, but also in Africa, in Mozambique in the past. So I would start really by congratulating Switzerland on its election to a Security Council position next year. It's in many ways a historic election because it will be the first time Switzerland participates in the Security Council as an elected member. Switzerland is a relatively recent member of the United Nations. It joined, I believe, 20 years ago. In fact, I was in Switzerland when it became a member in 2002, and I followed on the radio of my car. I remember at the time the very close voting from canton to canton to see how the vote came out. Although a recent member of the UN, Switzerland has already demonstrated a very strong engagement with the organization, and of course, it has a long-standing contribution to multilateralism as one of the host countries to the UN in Geneva, and also as the host country and depositary to the international, to the Geneva Conventions on International Humanitarian Law. But within this more recent 20-year period, they have demonstrated their engagement through, for example, being elected to preside over the General Assembly. Former Swiss President Joseph Deiss was the president of the GA's 65th session, but also demonstrating their leadership in discussions that range from everything from non-communicable diseases to cybersecurity, through the very active and competent work of Ambassador Jürg Laubers, who is now the Swiss permanent representative to the United Nations in Geneva. He was formerly in New York. I would also recall that Ambassador Peter Maurer, who is currently the head of the ICRC, the International Commission on the Red Cross, was also an ambassador to the United Nations who was noteworthy for his competence and also for his ability to make friends, I would add, a very dear colleague. At this stage, I would just highlight that I believe strongly in a close partnership between Brazil and Switzerland. I'll speak a little bit later on about some spontaneous affinities, also some contrasts between our two countries. But in the field of peace and security, I think we are well positioned to make a very coherent and significant contribution to the working of the Council. We are countries that have diplomatic relations with every other UN member. This may seem a trivial matter, but there are only about 24 countries in that category. Brazil perhaps has a very slight advantage because we also recognize Palestine as a state. This is something that Switzerland perhaps is still considering whether it should do or not. But otherwise, 192 out of 193 states we have diplomatic relations with, and a very extensive network of embassies. Brazil, a slightly larger network than Switzerland, with 133, I believe, currently embassies in Switzerland at the last count, through, according to the internet, 104. But a very strong presence of Swiss diplomacy in Africa, for example, which is a continent that is very much at the top of the agenda of the Security Council. So again, I believe both countries are well positioned to make a solid contribution. And I also find that there is scope for very constructive cooperation between the two delegations in New York, between our two governments, through Brasilia and Bern. And I see this as something that will benefit not only our own diplomacies, but also the functioning of the Council, more broadly speaking. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. So now to Switzerland, Ambassador Lettieri, the floor is yours.
Bom dia, good morning or good afternoon. Thank you very much, Ambassador Patriota, for your opening remarks. And thank you for sharing with us your profound experience and knowledge of the bilateral and multilateral system. And I'm very glad to participate in this discussion today with all of you. The director of the Geneva Centre for Security Policy, Ambassador Thomas Greminger, who was also my former boss and an exemplary diplomat, as well as with the representative of the Brazilian Ministry of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Seneschal. The embassy in Brasilia has an excellent cooperation with Itamaraty and your unit, especially. And thank you, CEBRI, for organizing this webinar. It's really a great opportunity to reinforce our cooperation and also to establish a relation with the GCSP. And CEBRI, it's a reference in Brazil, Latin America, and at the international level. And we are really delighted to start this new partnership on such an important topic. And I'm sure there will be other opportunities to cooperate on other relevant issues at the bilateral and global levels: economic relations, sustainability, innovation, and human rights. So let me share with you some thoughts about the Security Council, the promotion of peace and security, and some perspective on possible avenue of Swiss-Brazilian cooperation. First of all, today's event would have been honestly unimaginable a few years ago, because on 9 June 22, it's for Switzerland really a milestone for the Swiss foreign policy. And so Switzerland joined as mentioned by Ambassador Patriota, joined the UN 20 years ago. And so about 2 months ago, the GA elected Switzerland as a non-permanent member to the Security Council for the years 23-24. The election was a success and a great honor for our country. And I think it's really a high point in the relation between Switzerland and the UN. But this relation, it's nothing new. As we all are aware, Geneva was the seat of the League of Nations, and along with New York, the most important UN location worldwide. So Switzerland joined in 2002, and this accession came after, was also reminded by Ambassador Patriota, after a popular vote at the ballot box. So Swiss UN membership also has a direct democratic legitimacy. Also, Switzerland candidacy for the Security Council was publicly discussed in Switzerland in the political arena and confirmed several times by the Swiss Parliament. We consider that Swiss membership in the UN Security Council, it's a new and interesting instrument for promoting Switzerland foreign policy interesting and values. A peaceful global order based on the rule of law, it's of major importance for our country, which is export-oriented and really depends on the rule of law and on open markets with clear rules. Peace, security, and stability are key for Switzerland, not only for Switzerland, but especially for Switzerland and for its prosperity and development. I mentioned the fact that it's the first time that Switzerland joined the Security Council, but the promotion of peace and security are really firmly anchored in the Swiss federal constitution, and as well at the legislative level. And even before joining the UN, the Swiss commitment to human rights and to the UN Charter, I would say that belong to our political DNA and are an important basis for our foreign policy engagement. And this is reflected in several important documents that were adopted by our government, the Swiss Federal Council, for example, in our foreign policy strategy, in the international cooperation strategy, and we are here in the Americas. Peace and security promotion are also a very important point within the American strategy 22-25. Switzerland is globally known for its good offices. It's nothing new, and I think thanks to its neutrality, multilingual and cultural diversity, our humanitarian tradition, the recognized expertise and experience, and as well as a headquarter of the peace and humanitarian capital, Geneva. So Switzerland enjoys a high degree of credibility in peace building, and it's a sought after partner worldwide. Switzerland has been a mediator in conflicts, a bridge builder. It's there where we have similarities with Brazil. Our political system enables the search for political compromises, and this is internationally an important alternative to violence and wars. our contribution to peace can be at a thematic level, but also when we talk about methodology, we have been also relevant in different contexts. This engagement can take different forms. For example, from leading a mediation process directly. Mozambique was mentioned. This is a good example where Switzerland gave a key contribution, or what has been happening in Cameroon, where I was directly involved in a conflict in this country. A second engagement, Switzerland provides expertise to support other mediators, for example, the Syrian conflict. On a third level, we are providing support and expertise to the parties on how to conduct negotiation. For example, the case in Colombia, where we were supporting the parties, the government and the young groups, how to design a negotiation process, and also how to bring to the table some specific groups, women IDPs. And a last form of engagement, we have been also supporting talks in order to prepare the ground for peace processes, for example, what we have been doing in Libya. So if I observe the last years, Switzerland has been supporting about 17 peace process and facilitated ceasefires negotiation in 6 countries. And since it's a Swiss-Brazilian event, let me remind briefly that Brazil in the past also benefited from Swiss good offices. I recently inaugurated an exhibition about the 200 years of Brazilian independence and bilateral relations. And Brazil actually took advantage of our good offices in, at the time, a territorial dispute with France. In 1900, the president of the Swiss Confederation decided a territorial dispute on the border between France and Brazil. The territory of today's federal state of Amapá. So the decision was in favor of Brazil. And over the years, as you know, Switzerland has also diplomatically represented Brazil in several countries. So this is, I think, an important past of confidence and trust and cooperation between the two countries. Let me briefly point out the priorities that Switzerland selected for the periods on the Security Council. These periods and this experience will be coherent and complementary to our engagement. The first issue and first priority is building sustainable peace. We are convinced that Switzerland's tenure in the Security Council will be a plus for peace, and the Council will benefit from our extensive experience and positive track record, as I mentioned before. Second important topic, protecting civilians, a field where Switzerland is globally acknowledged for its long-standing humanitarian tradition and engagement, I think, about protection civilian in armed conflict, and of course our strong commitment to international humanitarian law. Climate security, addressing climate security. As we all are aware, climate change is acting as a threat multiplier with potential really to disrupt security and stability. So this is a key topic for us and for many countries. And then, as Ambassador Patriota mentioned before, yes, Switzerland will engage in enhancing effectiveness of the Council. We have been calling for many years for greater transparency, accountability of the Security Council, and we really intend to move this, or to give a contribution to move this reform effort forwards. And beside these key priorities, we are offering a wide range of tools and hands-on experience in the area of rule of law, institution building, and post-conflict reconstruction. A good recent example is the Ukraine Recovery Conference that took place in Lugano, that lay out some parameters for the future reconstruction of Ukraine. We are also very active within the UN system. For example, we chair the Burundi configuration on the UN Peacebuilding Commission, and we are among the top 10 donors to the Peacebuilding Fund. We are also very committed to strengthening the women, peace and security agenda, which really represents a key element of peace and security. And we are supporting the UN peace operation by providing civilian and military personnel. This is another, I think, relevant element where we can share ideas and engagement with our Brazilian partner. And of course, in addition to the priorities that are set now, it is clearly necessary to have the capacity and the flexibility to react to sudden and unexpected situation. So to conclude and identify some possible avenue of Swiss-Brazilian cooperation, there are various links to the Brazilian priorities in the UN Security Council. For example, when we talk about the development of the Women, Peace and Security agenda, or efficient peacekeeping, or the coordination with the Peacebuilding Commission, there I think we can really work together. And by the way, in this context, I would also like to congratulate Brazil for the recent re-election to the Organizational Committee of the UN Peacebuilding Commission for 23 and 24. And I'm convinced that Brazil and Switzerland can together positively shape the agenda in the Security Council in other areas, the respect of international humanitarian law and the protection of civilians. In the area of climate change, Brazilian is a key actor, and we are looking forward to work together in an innovative and positive manner, also looking and taking into account that Brazilian will have an election year this year and Brazilian next year. So we're going to look how this can shape and what kind of impact that can have on the foreign policy of our Brazilian friends. I'm also very confident that we will benefit from Brazil's great experience in the Security Council. Brazilian has been traditionally very active players when it comes on the debate of the reform of Security Council. So it's another topic that I think it's relevant. And in general, within multilateral institutions, there is a great need of bridge builders. And this is a shared identity. We have this expertise as bridge builders, our ability to talk to all actors, to find compromises. This will also benefit the Security Council next year when we're gonna be there together. Let me conclude by saying that there is no shortage of difficulties and challenges in today's world. The latest development in Europe, the fragmented geopolitical landscape, and the critical global economic outlook climate change will make our presence in the Security Council a moment, I think, at once interesting, but also delicate and challenging. We are all aware solutions to many global challenges will only be possible through collaboration, especially within the UN and multilateral institutions. So with this in mind, I really look forward to the inputs of my co-panelists and the discussion that will follow. Thank you very much. Muito obrigado.
Muito obrigada, Ambassador. Thank you very much. I think you provided us a very complete framework of the prospects for Brazilian and Switzerland cooperation in the UN Security Council. So starting from the Constitutional Committee to being build bridges and the shared identity for encouraging the peaceful settlement of disputes. So a lot of ground for us to work together. So thank you for your remarks. And before passing the floor to Gustavo Seneschal from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs Brazil, I would just like to encourage the more than 100 people that are watching us today, combining Zoom and YouTube, to send questions through the Q&A tool in the below bar of the Zoom. So please send us questions. I will gladly pass them to the panelists right after. So please, Gustavo Seneschal, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mariana. Good morning, good afternoon. Through you, I thank CEBRI for the invitation to participate in this event. My warm greetings to Ambassador Patriota, dear friends, to Ambassador Lazeri, and to Ambassador Greminger. First and foremost, in the outset, I would like to make a few comments about the participation of Brazil in the Security Council, and also to highlight some of our priorities, and also give you some information about our presidency that just finished now in July, to then delve into the topic of discussion, which is the collaboration between Switzerland and Brazil in the Council. So, as you probably know, Brazil, it's our 11th term serving as a non-permanent member of the Council. Brazil is a developing country that has served more terms as non-permanent member of the Council. We believe this is a recognition of our contribution to peace, to maintenance of peace and security. And as you know, Brazil has a long history of contribution to UN peacekeeping operations, from Suez to Angola, from Haiti to Lebanon. Just in terms of context, I'd just like to highlight that after a quite long gap between our 5th and our 6th term as non-permanent member, in 1988 to 1989, we have been consistently back in the Council for regularly for terms as non-permanent member, and we have witnessed a very interesting shift of dynamics between the members of the Council, both because of the configuration of the non-permanent members, but also the dynamics between the permanent members, seeing it from the end of the Cold War, having a more sort of unified voice of the Council that was being giving deciding over important issues of international peace and security, to the situation now where we see the Council very much polarized, and the situation actually has gone, I regret to say, but it has gone from bad to worse because of the current crisis between the Russian Federation and the Ukraine. It's our, in terms of our priorities, I just like to outline them briefly to those who don't know. When we put ourselves as candidates to a non-permanent member this time, we set out 7 priorities that are guiding our presence in the Council now, and which are, first and foremost, we've been championing the role of the Security Council in the prevention and peaceful resolution of conflict, something that is being tested at this very moment. Second, we are promoting efficient peacekeeping, And in this regard, we have prioritizing three key aspects of peacekeeping operations, which are provision of adequate pre-deployment and mission training, the promotion of safety and security of peacekeepers, and the improvement of strategic communications. Our third priority is which I think it's very much in line with Switzerland's priorities, which is the respect to humanitarian law and international human rights. And in this regard, as we are members of the group of friends of the protection of civilians in armed conflict, we are very much committed to the protection of vulnerable populations in context of conflict. Our fourth priority, also in line with our national action plan, is to continue to advance the women, peace and security agenda, especially in the participation of women in all stages of peace processes and conflict resolution. Our fifth priority is to advocate for a more frequent and meaningful interaction between the Peace Building Commission and the Security Council, especially during the negotiations of renewal of peacekeeping mandates and transitions. And our sixth priority is to foster an enhanced cooperation between the UN and regional organizations, particularly with the African Union, because of course, I mean, the African issues are, the bulk of the agenda of the Security Council. And last but not least, and also taking into account our historic position on Security Council reform, we're continuing to pursue the objective of having the Council more representative, transparent, and efficient. As for the presidency, like I said, I mean, in July, we presided over the Council for the month of July. We're very happy with the outcomes that we were able to achieve. First, we organized an open debate on the topic of strategic communications in UN peacekeeping operations. The event was chaired by our Foreign Minister, Ambassador Carlos França, and the main briefer was the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres. At the occasion, we were able to approve a presidential statement on strategic communications and peacekeeping operations. We are very happy. This is the first document ever adopted by the Council on this issue, which we think it's very, very meaningful, specifically in giving the transparency and the importance of the peacekeeping operations, and to really communicate with the national communities what is the purpose of the UN in the context of peacekeeping operations, and also because on the other hand, this also helps to protect the peacekeepers who are on the ground fulfilling the Security Council mandates. And this will unfold into the new strategy on strategic communications that's going to be launched in the next couple of months by the UN Secretariat. We also promoted another high-level event on the situation of children in armed conflicts, based on the report by the Secretary General on this issue. We had a very meaningful discussion on this, and the event was chaired by our Deputy Foreign Minister, Ambassador Fernando Simas. We also, in line with our priority of having a closer relationship between the PBC and the Security Council, we promoted a briefing of the President of the Peace Building Commission to the Council members. And overall, I think we had a very good outcome of our presidency. We were able to approve 7 resolutions, 1 presidential statement, and 7 press statements. I mean, considering the fact that the the discussions are so polarized in the council. We're very, very happy with that outcome. I just would like to highlight, in terms of resolutions, the resolution that renewed the mandate of the Special Political Mission of the UN in Haiti, and also the negotiation that led to the approval of the resolution on humanitarian assistance in Syria. As for the cooperation, I mean, I think Ambassador Lazzarini also already mentioned a few of the possible avenues of cooperation between Brazil and Switzerland in his when he spoke. But before even that, I'd just like to wish Switzerland, all the best success in their mandate as non-permanent member of the Security Council. We certainly we supported each other in our elections. So early on, we're very keen on having Switzerland as a non-permanent member in the Security Council with us. We think that we share similar principles, such as the strict respect to international humanitarian law and international human rights, and the empowerment and advocate empowerment of women, and the advocacy for adequate financing for development cooperation. Both countries are staunch supporters of multilateralism and disarmament, which is something that certainly guides, our foreign policies, and also in our case, our participation in the Council. We also committed, as much as Switzerland, with the having the Security Council more representative, transparent, and efficient. And we commend Switzerland's role in leadership of the ACT group, the Accountability, Coherence, and Transparency group. And I'm sure that we can work together on humanitarian issues, on the advancement of the Women, Peace, and Security agenda, and on the enhancement of the Security Council working methods. Regarding humanitarian issues, I just wanted to highlight our preoccupation now with what we see as a trend in the increasing of the that has a very bad effect in the work of the Council, and also in the selective application of humanitarian of international humanitarian law. As for specific issues, and I perhaps would like to hear also from the colleagues from Switzerland, we see that one specific item of the agenda of the Council that we could work perhaps together, even as co-pen holders, is the resolution on humanitarian assistance in Syria, because we know that Switzerland has a lot of experience in dealing with the conflicts. Even Ambassador Lazzarini mentioned that Switzerland provided mediators to work in this conflict. We haven't officially decided to take up this role, but I think it's something that Brazil could also contribute from our perspective, bearing in mind not only our experience, but also the fact that we have an important Brazilian Syrian community here in Brazil. Just on a personal note, I just wanted to say also that it will be a pleasure working closely again with the Swiss diplomats. Ambassador Patriota mentioned already that in the 65th session of the General Assembly that was chaired by Mr. Joseph Dice, he was the president of that General Assembly. I was seconded by the government of Brazil to work at the office of the President of General Assembly. So I worked during that term with the Swiss presidency. It was a great pleasure, and it will be a great pleasure and honor to do that again in the future in the Security Council. Thank you so much, Mariana. Thanks for your attention.
Thank you, Gustavo Seneschal. It was a pleasure to hear from you. And both you and Ambassador Lazzarini mentioned a very important topic for the Brazilian and Switzerland cooperation. Besides the thematic agenda that we can work with, the thematic agenda of humanitarian, rule of law, peace building, and so on, there is also the possibility to exchange best practices on the working methods of the Council. I think that's very important because as Brazil has been one of the countries that has served most times in the UN Security Council, it also masters a little bit how the Security Council works and how non-permanent members can effectively influence and be part of the discussions. So that kind of experience is also very important for a country who will be officially in the Security Council for the first time as Switzerland. So also, besides the thematic agenda, the structure of the country itself and how it works and the pattern of voting and relationships and all the informal dialogues that can be proposed, there are also good venues for cooperation in that regard. So you both highlighted that. I just wanted to wrap up. And now going back to Switzerland, it is my honor to pass the floor to Ambassador Greminger for his remarks.
Yeah, thank you very much, Mariana. Ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues, good morning and good afternoon, and thank you very much for inviting me to contribute to this very important event today. The world, as we know it, has been turned upside down lately. The COVID-19 pandemic, the storming of the US Capitol, and the war in Ukraine have shattered our assumptions and made the unthinkable reality. And in a way, we are witnessing an inflection point in world history. Clearly, this is not the time for business as usual. Yet, if we are to manage current crises and prepare for those on the horizon, there is need for more cooperation, greater solidarity, and especially for innovative approaches. Today, many of the challenges that affect national security are born from non-state actors or transnational threats, such as pandemics, cyber attacks, transnational crime, or climate change. There are no military solutions to these problems, nor can states deal with them alone. In this sense, cooperation has become self-interest, or as UN Secretary General Guterres put it, solidarity is self-interest. And as I stand here today, I would like to discuss how multilateral institutions and bridge builder states, such as Switzerland and Brazil, could play a role in promoting cooperation. International relations have reached a degree of polarization as never before since the height of the Cold War. Autocracies versus democracies, Russia versus the West, the United States versus China. Given such polarization, the question of whether there is still room for cooperation within multilateral institutions, such as the UN or regional organizations like the OSCE, for that matter, poses itself. The UN was born at the end of the Second World War to, and I quote, save succeeding generations from the scourge of war, as enumerated in its charter. It failed, but don't blame the UN as an institution for it. Its member states would not let it do its job. Indeed, its basic principles of cooperation and good neighborly relations are regularly violated by member states. Much of this responsibility lies with the members of the UN Security Council, especially its permanent members, whose primary responsibility should be the maintenance of international peace and security. Switzerland, as has been mentioned, will be joining Brazil for the year of 2023 as the UN Security Council non-permanent member at a time when the world order is being reshaped. As Ambassador Lazzari said, one of Switzerland's priorities will be focused on conflict prevention. This implies also to focus on putting into action Chapter 6 of the Charter, focusing on the Pacific settlement of disputes. There has been a notable absence of UN mediation to end the war in Ukraine. And this is not for the lack of trying by the UN Secretary General. The Security Council remains deadlocked while the UN General Assembly's vote condemning the Russian invasion has highlighted the prevalence of polarization among its member states, with 20% of members choosing to abstain, representing 3/4 of the world population, abstaining or voting against the condemnation. And this, and I think this is quite worrisome, represents some 3/4 of the world population. In recent weeks, however, the United Nations has played a leading role in brokering a grain corridor deal between Ukraine and Russia. This deal should mitigate some of the most severe repercussions of the war, threatening food security around the globe. Switzerland is just as responsible as any other UN member state for upholding a rule-based system. However, Switzerland also faces the challenge of achieving a balancing act. On the one hand, Switzerland aims to preserve and advocate for the respect of international norms and principles. On the other, it aims to maintain dialogue with all member states, including the Russian Federation, including China. The Security Council will remain a very important forum for these kinds of dialogues. At the beginning of my presentation, I called for innovative approaches to manage the current crisis. In a situation where global top-down approaches are largely blocked, regional arrangements could, at least in theory, play a role, very much in the spirit of Chapter 8 of the UN Charter. Prior to becoming director of the Geneva Centre for Security Policy, I happened to be Secretary General of the Organization for Security and Cooperation in Europe. Now, this is an organization that would be well placed to help implement an eventual ceasefire or peace agreement in Ukraine, as it is the only regional organization which brings together all key stakeholders. However, the Russian Federation's violation of key norms and principles of European security has paralyzed, to a large extent, the work of the organization, where the decision-making process has always been very politicized and based on the principle of consensus. Yet, this very organization was created as a platform for dialogue among non-like-minded members during the Cold War. And I believe that we need to keep such spaces preserved and eventually recreate. Unfortunately, the dominant mindset is that there can be no dialogue, no cooperation, as long as there is armed conflict. This basically means that there is no business at all for the time being. But we do not know when this war will end. What is clear is that the way it ends will affect the future global and also obviously the European security order. Hence, and this is one of my key messages here, it is not premature to start thinking on how to rebuild security in a post-war Europe, in a post-war world, and on how best to improve relations between Russia and the West. It is precisely in times of crisis that one needs a strategy. And in addition to taking steps to end the war in Ukraine, it is time to start thinking about what a new European and global security order would look like beyond sheer reliance on deterrence. The CSCOEC experience shows that the new security order could be constructed through a series of inclusive consultations like the Helsinki process in the 1970s. The issue with a Helsinki 2.0 idea is that, unlike then, neither side is currently in the mood for détente, for dialogue. There are few bridge builders around to broker consensus. And here again, the role of Switzerland, the role of Brazil as potential bridge builders between non-like-minded states could turn out to be essential. In these challenging times, there have been calls for deterrence and rearmament, and this is understandable. But the current crisis also demonstrates how interconnected we all are. And it also demonstrates what happens when cooperation fails. So we definitely need to start thinking of sustainable solutions, of unified responses to long-term and slow-burning issues such as climate change or transnational crime, for that matter, which even the most powerful states are unable to tackle on their own. In order to find ways of living together, I believe that we need to maintain functioning multilateral institutions, which enable us to preserve spaces for future dialogues and cooperation. Only in this manner can we tackle global challenges in a cooperative and eventually effective way. Thank you for your attention. Back to you, Mariana.
Thank you, Ambassador. Great to hear from you and your perspective as well. And last but not least, I will now invite Ambassador Antonio Patriota to his remarks. And also, Ambassador, if you want to highlight what you thought about the other participants' statements, please feel free to do so.
Thank you very much, Mariana. Let me say to start off that I very much enjoyed all interventions, but particularly some of the last points made by Mr. Greminger, where I think he really touches on a very significant ability that both Switzerland and Brazil potentially have, which is to build bridges and to act as honest brokers. You know, given the fact we don't have declared enemies, Switzerland is not a member of any military alliance, to my knowledge. It's not a NATO member. It's also not a member of the European Union, so it enjoys a certain latitude and independence in this regard. It also has a very interesting characteristic, which I think it has carried out for maybe more than a century, which is representing the interests of countries in third parties. So, for example, today, the United States has no diplomatic presence in Iran, but to my knowledge, it is still Switzerland that represents the United States in Iran. What this does is give actually Switzerland a first-hand knowledge of many of, let's say, the hottest spots around the world, which I think is definitely a comparative advantage that it will bring to its tenure in the Council. I mentioned at the outset that I was going to speak of some contrasts and affinities. I think the contrasts are quite obvious. You know, Switzerland has a territory that is 4% that of Brazil, a population that is less than 1% the Brazilian population, a GDP that is about half the Brazilian GDP, and a per capita income which is 12 times higher than the Brazilian per capita income. So that gives you already a notion of where the similarities and differences may lie. But as I mentioned before, I think we're both countries that invest quite a bit on diplomacy. We are very attached to democratic principles, and we are eager to make multilateralism work. Now, within the UN system, our experiences are different. Brazil is a founding member since 1945. Brazil is the developing country that has been the most frequently elected as a non-permanent member to the Security Council. This is our 11th participation. So this is one aspect in which we may have something to share from a perspective of accumulated experience with our Swiss colleagues. But the affinities are many, and I am also very encouraged to see how Switzerland has engaged with the Peace Building Commission, and to my knowledge, they have contributed more than $8 million US to the Peace Building Fund. This is very much in line with the importance we give, and we have just been reelected. I had the honor of presiding over the Peace Building Commission in 2014, so I believe it's a still relatively untapped source of potentially very effective policy for dealing, especially with post-conflict peace building. Sometimes I compare the Security Council to an intensive care unit and the Peace Building Commission to a rehabilitation center, where you need to help countries to toe the line until they find their own bearing in terms of stability, security, economic development, and so on. And if I look at some of the priorities that were mentioned, and Ambassador Lazari summarized them to us, and then after that, Gustavo Seneschal mentioned Brazil's priorities. I think there's a lot of overlap. There's certainly overlap in commitment to international humanitarian law, and of course here Switzerland has the greatest authority of all, and I certainly look forward to seeing it reflect this tradition, this long tradition that started with Henri Dunant in Geneva in its work in the Council. But protection of civilians would not be necessary if we didn't have all these avoidable wars happening all over the place, including wars that have been the product of policy by very powerful countries. So there is no correlation between level of development and how responsible a citizen you are when it comes to respecting the UN Charter, and especially the provisions of Chapter 7. In fact, sometimes some of the most powerful countries demonstrate a very uncanny ability to violate the UN Charter in ways that generate, well, what afterwards the international community has to deal with, which is the mopping up, the dealing with the civilian spin-offs and consequences. We still see this in the Middle East all over the place. Some of you don't know that I'm speaking from Cairo in Egypt, where I'm ambassador, where I think very ill-advised interventions have spread instability over a very large swath of territory. And now we see it in Eastern Europe as well. So whereas a lot of energy in the Security Council is spent over Africa and situations in the developing world, I think more attention has to be given to the role that great powers play in the field of peace and security. And I think a country like Switzerland is very well positioned to not only stand up for rule of law within countries, but respect for rule of law internationally, especially respect for international laws, respect for the United Nations Charter. Another area where I see a great potential for cooperation is in enhancing the effectiveness of the Council. And I'm happy to hear, Mariana, that you're a specialist on the matter. I'm sure you've heard about the frustration of most elected members with the distribution of pen holderships that are often in the hands of former colonial powers, something that I find very difficult to understand, even to this very day. I mean, we are long past decolonization, and still these remnants of a situation of dependence that should have been completely wiped away are still present in the working of the Council. Here in the Middle East, North Africa, I'm also struck by the fact that most of the special representatives of the Secretary General come from Europe, where there is, considerable talent to be tapped in the developing world, whether Latin America, Africa, Middle East, Asia, for these positions. I also believe that this is something that needs to change. Now that Libya is coming up for the appointment of a special representative, I think it would be highly desirable that it should be an Arab speaker, somebody who knows the region, in principle, somebody from the region, not a neighboring country, because that is often a red line, but why not an African or a member of an Arab country that is a little bit more far removed. We also have seen how, and I think Mr. Greminger was very candid in pointing out the obstruction that the permanent members are often responsible for, and the lack of transparency also that they seem to perpetuate, meeting behind closed doors, confronting the rest of the membership with ready-made texts on an almost take it or leave it basis with very little scope for amendment or discussion of some of the substantive provisions. Year in, year out, there are outcries against the situation, and yet things remain more or less the same. I think if small but very effective developed countries like Switzerland with a large international footprint stand up for what I would call greater democracy in international relations, I think we should be able to make some headway. You know, we were celebrating here in Cairo the 30 years since former UN Secretary General Boutros Ghali presented his Agenda for Peace. And one very interesting feature of the Agenda for Peace is that Boutros Ghali was the first SG to actually try to promote democracy, not only as an ideal form of government within countries, but also as a feature of international relations. Some of you might say, well, he was not reelected for a second mandate, so maybe some of his ideas were not very popular with the membership. But I think he was ahead of his time in this respect. And this is an idea that I think we should not abandon, especially now when we see an outcry against obstructionism due to veto of one of the P5. There was a very important historic resolution passed by a small neighboring country of Switzerland. Liechtenstein took the leadership in this regard, in order to call for some degree of accountability. You know, if a permanent member imposes a veto and prevents the council to perform its, you know, stand up for its responsibilities in the protection and promotion of international peace and security, well, the rest of the membership ought to know why and what is the justification. So this new resolution, I think, is a demonstration that the call for more democratic international relations has not died. In fact, it may be surging again. So I would really encourage those who are more directly involved. I am speaking here, you know, almost a little bit freely, although I'm a member of the diplomatic corps, but I'm not directly involved. So also my white beard allows me to take this kind of relative distance from the heat of the debates and make some provocative suggestions. Let me also touch on an area where I believe that there's need for greater clarity. And this is the idea of bringing climate change into the Security Council. I find that this is a debate that has not been sufficiently explored because there are some difficulties conceptually and in practical terms for doing this on a systematic basis. I think on a case-by-case basis, one may discover that there is indeed a relationship between climate change and a given conflict. Maybe in the Sahel region in Mali, where you see desertification advancing, or in Burkina Faso, there is something to be said. But if you take a broad view that the Security Council is entitled to discuss climate change, I think you are confusing collective security with collective responsibility, because the remedies that the Security Council can bring to any given situation brought to its attention, let's say mediation, ceasefires, a peacekeeping operation, an arms embargo, a sanctions regime, ultimately a military intervention, none of these are going to have any impact on climate change. This is one set of considerations. The second set is that climate change is so important and vital to the entire international community that I think it would be unfair to present the Security Council, a body of 15 members with 5 permanent members who can wield vetoes, not always in the wisest way, to deliberate on issues of such widespread importance. So I would really caution against taking let's say, a sweeping view of climate change within the Security Council, because I think this can introduce a distortion in the discussion of the topic that will be detrimental, in fact, to combating climate change, and also will not necessarily improve our chances of dealing with security issues either. As a concluding thought, and I mentioned this in my introductory presentation, I think it's an interesting coincidence that Switzerland's first year, our second year, and our 11th period as a non-permanent member, will take place when a summit for the future has been convened by the Secretary General. Now, what does this reflect on the organization? I think a sense of crisis and stress. And many of you have mentioned a time of turmoil. Mr. Gumminger has mentioned a moment, a turning point, or certainly the sense that the multilateral system is facing a crisis is very widespread. And I think that this opportunity should not be taken lightly and should be fully made use of. Now, how to make full use of it? I think in two ways, both in governance terms and in substantive terms. There have been some calls for even convening a review conference of the Charter under Article 109. The group I take part in, called Leaders for Peace, that met in Geneva recently, has included that in its annual report. There are voices in Brazil also calling for that, such as Oded Grajew, who has recently been part of a discussion with CEBRI. Now, why are these calls appearing on the horizon? Because there's a sense that after 75 years, although the multilateral system as we know it has survived, and that in itself is cause for celebration, it will not regenerate automatically. It needs really a high-level political commitment, political leadership, the mobilization of societies, and I think it's very important to mobilize youth, for example, because youth are very sensitive. We see this through leaders like Greta Thunberg from Sweden, very sensitive to the whole environmental and climate agenda. And yet the UN Charter has no provisions in its principles and objectives about protecting the planet or saving human life within the planet. This would be an opportunity to introduce an environmental dimension into the Charter. So I'm speaking now of the substantive aspect, but also an opportunity to finally deal with Security Council expansion, because I think there's no longer any excuse for perpetuating a system of only 15 countries deliberating of matters of such importance. When we saw the financial crisis in 2008, the G7, that at times also invited Russia to participate as G8, became the G20. So it was very clear to those in charge of financial economic matters at the time that the table was not sufficiently large or representative for the international community to deliberate or coordinate on important financial economic matters. And I think likewise, we have to recognize that a table of 15 with only the 5 permanent members that came into being in 1945 is no longer representative or inclusive enough. So again, take advantage of the Summit of the Future to highlight these shortcomings and really to promote change. And I would encourage very much an outreach, including by CEBRI, by the way, towards civil society, private sector, because a failure in peace and security affects everything. It affects trade, the economy, predictability, and all aspects of our survival on a day-to-day basis. And if we act too late, we may be confronted with a situation of breakdown. By the way, Antonio Guterres, the Secretary General, has been speaking of breakdown or breakthrough. So this is a big opportunity for breakthrough. And I sincerely believe that countries like Brazil and Switzerland, for reasons that have been very well exposed by Mr. Greminger, for example, as potential bridge builders, can play an active role in this regard. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ambassador. Always a pleasure to hear from you and from your wide background on multilateral affairs. So thank you for the masterclass, if I may say. I have some questions from the audience, and as you may imagine, most of them are about the Ukrainian situation. So I will just save the Ukrainian matter for the last round of questions and go to the other topics, so we can keep on the perspectives for the Brazilian and Switzerland participation in the Security Council. The first of one, we have 2 questions from Danilo Marcondes, who is a professor at the Brazilian War College here in Brazil. One of them is about Brazil and the other of them is about Switzerland. So I will direct the Brazilian one to Gustavo and Ambassador Patriota, and then the Swiss one to Ambassador Lazeri and Ambassador Greminger. So the first question about Brazil. Danilo Marcondes says that in the past, Brazilian participation in the Security Council coincided with Brazilian troop contributions to United Nations peacekeeping, as was Haiti in 2004 and Lebanon in 2011. So he asks if you envision a possibility for a Brazilian troop contribution within this ongoing term, so this year and next year. Ambassador Patriota, would you like to start?
Yes, gladly. Well, I am not privy to any discussions regarding possible participation. I don't see it as an absolute necessity that Brazil be permanently well represented within the group of countries that contribute with troops worldwide. I think we've made very important contributions in Haiti and Lebanon and elsewhere. But if I may just, let's say, pose an idea for the future, almost as food for thought, I would suggest that at some point, the situation in Syria will come to a ceasefire and to an agreement of some kind that will require the positioning of United Nations military observers, peacekeepers, in order to enforce or to monitor an understanding. And I hope that this is sooner rather than later, because Syria has already suffered long enough with a very bloody, destructive civil war. And as a country that has never closed its embassy in Damascus, although we have been very critical of the Assad regime and the Human Rights Council, so also, attempting what others have described as a balancing act that many of us must do, but succeeding in maintaining a measure of trust with, I think, all parties, Brazil would be very well positioned to take part in such an effort, including, for reasons that Gustavo Seneschal mentioned, the very sizable community of Lebanese and Syrian migrants in Brazil. So I think Brazilian society would also be supportive of something of that nature.
Gustavo, please.
Sure, thank you. I just wanted to add, I mean, from the perspective of the government, so to speak, there have been discussions on deployments of troops to peacekeeping missions, but those discussions they're very incipient at this point in time, especially because this is something that whatever decision is taken on this, it has to go through Congress. So since we are in an election year, that wouldn't be perhaps appropriate or the right time to have this discussion brought to the attention of the National Congress. I don't think there's appetite even from any of the actors involved to take this decision at this point in time. But all I can say is that there is interest, especially by the military community in Brazil. We have been discussing some possibilities, but at the same time, I go along with what Ambassador Patriota said, that it's not something that it's necessary to show our commitment to peace and security at large. One issue that I've been discussing with my colleagues here at Itamaraty is also to increase our participation or role in mediation processes, which is something that we have also a lot to learn from Switzerland. And just a final word, just to say my greetings to the person who asked the question, also a very good friend of mine, Danilo. Thanks for watching this debate. Thank you, Mariana. Back to you.
Thank you, Gustavo. So the second part of Danilo's question is about the Switzerland strategy. So I'll pose that one to Ambassador Lazari and then to Ambassador Greminger. He asks specifically about the Switzerland role, involvement, or strategy regarding piracy and maritime security. That it is also a topic that is currently under debate in the UN Security Council. So do you have any hints about how Switzerland could engage with that topic? So Ambassador Lazari, you may start, please.
Yeah, thank you. This has been a prominent topic. We have been following this topic in two areas, the Gulf of Guinea and then off the coast of Somalia. We have been contributing to a regional organization, for example, the African Union, and we have been involved in working group. This is mainly what I would have to say in this regard. At the moment, I would say it's a topic that we have been following, but it's not really top priorities on the Swiss agenda. We have been, of course, affected by piracy in several regions of the world, but in terms of engagement, I would say Switzerland is not a top player.
Ambassador Greminger, do you want to add some comments?
Yeah, look, I mean, let's be frank. Switzerland has never been a large contributor to UN peacekeeping. And this is mainly due to internal politics in Switzerland. There has been very consistently an unholy alliance between the national right and the left that basically prevented Switzerland from contributing to peacekeeping to a level that many people would expect from a relatively well-to-do country like Switzerland. So I'm not saying that what Switzerland is doing is not serious, it's solid, but clearly not up to expectations. And this is why Switzerland started 30 years ago investing very much in soft contribution, in mediation, in facilitation. The 3 Geneva centers, my center, was basically created because there was a realization by the Swiss government that Switzerland will probably never contribute in an adequate way to UN peacekeeping. So we kind of tried to compensate by soft contributions to conflict management and conflict resolution by the 3 centers. I wouldn't exclude that in the medium to long term, you know, there might be a change of mindset in Switzerland if, you know, all of a sudden there is a peace to keep in Ukraine. This could trigger a readiness within the Swiss population to contribute in a much more significant way that we currently do. But I'm afraid in the short to medium term, you will not see much beyond the current level.
Maybe if I may, because I think the sound came to me not very clear. So I understood the question about piracy, not peacekeeping. So let me ratify. Just adding to what Ambassador Greminger said, we can point out that Switzerland is supporting peace operation, peacekeeping operation by providing civilian and military personnel. We do share expertise and we deliver training, and the Swiss Armed Forces staff is currently serving in about 16 or 80 countries where multilateral peace operations are deployed. But as Ambassador Greminger said, I think the debate, it's an ongoing debate in Switzerland, and we are very much more focused on peace promotion in several contexts where peacekeeping it's not the major component.
Thank you, Ambassador. The question was indeed about piracy, but I think your thoughts on peacekeeping operations was also great. So thank you for that. We had 2 answers in one. The other question that I want to pose to you all, first, the question was directly to Ambassador Patriota, but then the others feel free to comment, is about the relation between climate change and security. The question is from Monica Mendes, and she asks, what are your thoughts about this agenda, since the new NATO strategic concept includes climate change in it? So how do you analyze the connection between these 2 agendas in the UN, in the NATO, and also in the cooperation between them too?
Well, I would start by saying that we are not members of NATO, and you know, we are part of a denuclearized zone. In fact, the first one in the world, created by the Treaty of Tlatelolco. So I think, in fact, it is legally impossible for a country that has foregone the military use of nuclear energy, such as Brazil, in our own constitution, and as part of a denuclearized zone, to to have a relationship, even one of, let's say, association, with a defense alliance that foresees the use of nuclear weapons. And there's something that even Secretary General Antonio Guterres was mentioning at the opening of the review conference of the NPT the other day, that we haven't come as close to discussing the possibility of nuclear warfare since the Cuban Missile Crisis in the 60s, and this has suddenly come back to the agenda. So important to highlight this aspect also of Brazilian foreign policy that perhaps is a little bit different for a country in the center of Europe. And not only that, but Brazil was the first country to sign the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons that came into force last year, and whose initiators won the Nobel Peace Prize a few years ago, as you will remember, ICAN, the International Coalition for the Abolition of Nuclear Weapons. So just to clarify what is a possible relationship or not with NATO on the part of Latin American, Caribbean countries. But more specifically on climate change, no, I really considered that we need to propose a discussion about collective security and collective responsibility. Because if you introduce climate or public health issues that are of extreme relevance, importance to the wider international community, and that are presently being discussed within universal fora, such as the General Assembly, and not restricted for where only 15 countries participate, it would be a mistake, in my view. You will not improve the situation of the world in a climate sense by framing it, positioning it within a framework of collective security. Collective security is conceived in the UN Charter and historically to deal with very material threats to peace, military threats to peace, war, conflict, civil war, situations that warrant concern from a humanitarian point of view as well. Jus in bello, jus ad bello, as the Swiss very often remind us. What is the gain that we will extract from introducing into the Security Council a debate of this nature? This is a question that I think we need to ponder. On the other hand, I would not like to reduce or diminish the importance of our collective responsibility. That means every single country, every single United Nations member in protecting the environment. And as Sebastião Salgado says, the great Brazilian photographer, it's not so much the planet that we're protecting, it's human life on the planet. Because if the planet warms up beyond 5 degrees, we will all disappear, and the planet will regenerate very beautifully within, I don't know, 1,000 years or so, and maybe with new kinds of dinosaurs roaming around. So it's really about preserving civilization, preserving human life in our Earth that we commonly share. And this is, I think, one of the great challenges of the current generation. And I welcome very much what Antonio Guterres has proposed at the UN, which is enhancing intergenerational dialogue. He even suggested that the Trusteeship Council should be converted into a kind of body that might permanently be attributed with this responsibility. I don't know how much support that idea has obtained, but be it within the trusteeship or elsewhere, I think it's very important to attract the interest of all segments of society. I mentioned youth before, into the scope for really making a difference with such challenges within the multilateral system. But in my opinion, not in the Security Council.
Thank you, Ambassador. And I see that both Ambassador Gremiger and Gustavo have raised their hands. So please, Ambassador.
Well, just briefly, I kind of feel compelled to contribute to this discussion, because I tried during my term as Secretary General of the OEC to bring the climate change security nexus on the agenda of this regional security organization. And I insist on, the notion of security. So I want us to discuss the repercussions of climate change on security, because I think that's absolutely fundamental, not least also in the perspective of conflict prevention. And in the OSCE, this meant helping states in assessing potential hotspots in their countries, in their subregions, helping them to come up with adaptation strategies. And since often challenges by these hotspots imply cross-border cooperation, you kind of also, it kind of was natural or is natural that an international organization tries to discuss this security, this climate change security nexus, and that's also how I would see, the role of the UN Security Council. It's not about discussing climate change in general. I think this goes way beyond the UN Security Council. But when it comes to preventing or dealing with the repercussions on security, I think this would make sense.
Thank you, Ambassador. Gustavo, do you want to complement?
Yes, thank you, Mariana. Well, just before one brief word on peacekeeping operations, also just wanted to say that even though we are not deploying troops to peacekeeping operations at this moment, we have individual peacekeepers serving in all UN peacekeeping missions except MINUSMA in Mali, just to record that. On climate change, we are here to discuss our convergences, but in fact, this is something that perhaps will be our biggest difference of opinion in the discussions in the Council. We are very harsh critics of this, bringing the discussion to the Council. I mean, besides everything that the Ambassador Patriota has already said, I echo all his arguments against bringing this discussion to the Council. I just wanted to highlight three more points. The first one is that we don't have, when discussing specifics or specific mandates in the Security Council, we don't have specific data on how climate change affects those situations of conflict. Perhaps the only one that we are more we could agree that there's maybe some link is, as Ambassador Patriota said, the situation in the Sahel. But we keep saying this to our colleagues in the Security Council, that just to give one, I think, very concrete example of how weak this link is the fact that there have been in the recent IPCC reports.
Eu achei que estava usando pouquinho provocativo.
In the IPCC report, there are the panel of experts. They have stated that there's no evidence that the climate change is the main trigger of conflicts in situations of conflict. And last but not least, the Security Council doesn't have, from our perspective, in its toolkit instruments to deal with climate change. We believe that the root causes of conflict are much more related to development, economic and social development, or the lack of it, rather than climate change. Thank you, Mariana. Back to you.
Ambassador Lazari has also raised his hand, so please, Ambassador.
Yeah, thank you very much. Sebastião Salgado was mentioned, and we are very proud of supporting the exhibition here in Rio. A great opportunity. Now, let me briefly just tackle the question. The debate is getting interesting and time is running. I would remind the fact that Switzerland has been cooperating on the question of the link between climate change and security and displacement also since the year 2000. We were supporting at the time the mandate of Mr. Walter Kelling, Special Representative on IDPs, and I think it was possible really to underline several very good examples where displacement induced by climate change were affecting security. And so this is just a very concrete example. When we talk about addressing climate security within the Security Council, we are thinking about three main avenues. The first is try to address security and peace policy relevant impacts of climate change and identifying possible solutions. So it's a very pragmatic debate. And the other, it's more, I would say, a homework exercise. So trying to establish key links between POC, protection of civilian, reducing the risk of disaster and preventing conflict. And then the third component, it's try to find solution driving on the expertise of Switzerland, but not only of the scientific community, civil society, and also it's an expertise that really do exist in the international Geneva. So we don't pretend to change the world, but we do think that the link between climate security, climate change, and security and stability, it's really a key topic in several countries, and this is the moment to move forward.
Thank you, Ambassador. I think we have to schedule another debate just about that agenda because we have a lot of points to cover that. I see that Ambassador Patriota has also raised his hand, but as our time is coming to an end, Ambassador, if you want to make your comments and also your final statement, that would be good, please.
I was going to mention very briefly that I don't deny that there may be a link between, let's say, an evolving deterioration of the climate situation and tensions that could erupt into conflict. But I think the right forum for that would be perhaps the PBC that deals with prevention more effectively, or the General Assembly. Why not do it in the General Assembly? Because again, I insist, you're not going to solve this through peacekeeping operations or sanctions regimes or, or ceasefires, which are the tools at the disposal of Security Council. But as you say, this is not a topic that we will solve now in one discussion. It was interesting, and I think it's important to bring it out. I would add one point that almost as a little provocation, that I think it goes against my idea of democratization of the debates at the UN to bring certain subjects into the Security Council, because what you're doing is empowering the P5 to render those topics more political and eventually even veto certain approaches. So an agenda for more democratic international relations, I think, needs to distinguish very clearly between what falls into collective security and what does not. That's the general point. Otherwise, I think I'd reinforce the sense that I pick up from this conversation that Switzerland has a lot to offer to the United Nations in every aspect, but very specifically in the peace and security domain. I congratulate Switzerland for having taken this decision. It will be an excellent occasion for the Swiss to demonstrate their experience, their accumulated knowledge of many conflict zones, including through delivery of humanitarian assistance and other means, through their mediation efforts, through hosting a number of important conferences in Geneva to deal with war zones. And for Brazil, I think it's a great opportunity to engage with a member of the Western group in the Security Council that is not a NATO member, that is not nuclearly armed, that is not a member of the European Union, while we have excellent relations with the European Union. But I think this can be transformed into a plus as well, especially when I think of the last words that were pronounced by Ambassador Greminger, acting as build bridgers and not neglecting the most serious and potentially disruptive crisis of the moment, such as Ukraine. A lot of attention is given to small comparatively less important conflicts in the Council, and sometimes the perspective is lost on what can really generate a next world war. So with that final thought, let me thank you, Mariana, for allowing me to participate in this really excellent, thought-provoking exchange today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. As you mentioned, the points of conversions are many. I have wrote down some very freely, and just to give you an example, both Brazil and Switzerland are constitutionally committed to peace. Both have historical practice as bridge builders. Both are prone to the peaceful settlement of disputes, and good office and mediations were highlighted here today. Both enhance the humanitarian aspect of peacekeeping operation, focus on peace building and the protections of civilians in armed conflicts. Both are committed to ensure the rule of law, improving the Council's transparency, accountability, and also in a personal touch, you both mentioned the woman, peace and security agenda. So I think there's also me as a woman moderating this panel, I could not miss the opportunity to highlight that there is also an agenda that you should cooperate as well. So we are going to the final minutes of our debate. I will pass the floor to Ambassador Lazzarini, then to Ambassador Greminger, and then to Gustavo, so you can make your brief concluding remarks.
Yeah, thank you, Mariana. Thank you to CEBRI, to Ambassador Patriota, to Gustavo Seneschal, and to Ambassador Greminger. It's a very good start of our partnership, very rich debate. And as I always repeat to my junior colleagues at the embassy, it's a privilege working in Brazil and dealing with such competent interlocutors, not always easy, not always like-minded, but always very rich. And I think we must insist on the quality of our both countries of bridge builders and the capacity of forging this relationship. I think will really be of great importance in a divided world. And we have, both countries have been in peace for decades. This is something very relevant. And I think we are looking forward to strengthen our cooperation. We must be persistent, and sometimes in the peace world, fruits need persistence and stubbornness. I won't repeat the possible fields of cooperation, IHL, protection of civilians, and peace promotion. I do only think that we have a great potential of a more systematic and intense bilateral and multilateral cooperation in several contexts, because we almost have a universal presence, Brazil and Switzerland. So I'm thinking about some specific situation, the Central African Republic, Syria, Haiti, where I think this interplay and cooperation within the bilateral and multilateral activities needs to be explored. So thank you very much. We will continue to work with you in Brasilia, in Geneva, in New York, in Bangui, and in Bogota, and looking forward to continue our cooperation with CEBRI.
Thank you very much, Ambassador. It is a pleasure to start our partnership with such a high level and timely debate. So, Ambassador Greminger, your final remarks, please.
Yeah, I'll be very brief. I think the most relevant points have been highlighted. I think there is a large overlap when we look at the priorities of Brazil and Switzerland. So from a more technical point of view, I think there is a relatively broad range of possibilities to work together on thematic issues. You mentioned, Mariana, women, peace and security agenda, the focus on conflict management, resolution and peace building, the attachment to IHL and protection of civilians in conflict. I think there is a lot. We have also, I think, felt that it will not be this climate security nexus, but I think there is here a broad range of options. And at the end, you know, it's now a matter of our operational actors in capitals and on the ground to figure out how to practically put that into effect. More politically, I'm very much with Ambassador Patriota. I think there is this bridge building potential that I think is very interesting. Switzerland as a neutral European, non-NATO, non-EU country, together with a large South American actor that has an ambition to be a bridge builder. I think here there is quite some potential, and I hope if there is political will by the leaderships of both countries, that is a potential that could be exploited. Thank you. Back to you.
Thank you. Ambassador Gustavo, please.
Thank you, Mariana. No, very briefly, I think you summed up very well, I mean, the possibilities of cooperation between our two countries. I just wanted to put myself at the entire disposal of the Swiss colleagues in New York and here in Brazil, of course. Just to mention that we're going to have at the end of this month a meeting in Oslo, to which I understand that these Swiss colleagues have also been invited. The E10, so the 10 non-permanent members, including the incoming 5, will be discussing issues of the agenda of the Security Council. So maybe would also be an opportunity for us bilaterally, the colleagues who were attending, me, myself, and our colleague from New York, who's also going to discuss some of these issues that we also debated today. Thank you so much again for the invitation, and it's a pleasure and honor to be with Ambassador Patriota Lazeri and Ambassador Greminger as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Gustavo. So the 10 minutes delay was my Carioca touch to the Swiss punctuality. So with that, I'm going to thank you again for your participation and also the audience, and looking forward to meeting you all again.
Bye-bye, thanks.